Welcome to the Handyman Hotline. Today we're going to talk about how to prevent mold in your basement, how to make sure you're going to drill next to an outlet safely, and why do cockroaches not want to die? That and more on this episode of the Handyman Hotline. Roll the intro!
Mercury Stardust, she's a beacon of hope in the darkest night. Mercury Stardust, she'll teach you how to make it all alright.
Hey guys, gals, and non-binary pals, thank you so much for returning to the Handyman Hotline. And if this is your first time, what a great episode for you to join on. We don't just talk about hardware and about tools, we also talk a lot about life and about learning new skills that don't just apply to fixing things at home, but learning new skills that can apply to our everyday life and existence in the world. A lot of us who come onto this podcast and ask these questions, and even me, I think a lot of us are just trying to get by one day at a time, and we're all coming at it from different angles. And today, to start out the episode, I have a wonderful question that I would like to share with all of you. Let's roll the first clip of the day.
Hi, Mercury. My name is Tiffany, she, her pronouns, and I don't have a problem. I have a compliment. Your phrase, I'm worth the time to learn a new skill, has literally changed my life. And I know you didn't intend for it to be applied this way, but I have applied it to my sobriety. I am worth the time it takes to learn the skill of being sober. So thank you so much for that. I love you. Bye.
What a timely question to get today. Today is my 3,000th day of being sober myself. I stopped in November of 2016, and it has been a whirlwind for me too. I gotta tell you, Tiffany, it's one of the most biggest pleasures in my life to be able to affect people in a positive way inadvertently. I always talk about how the good that we do in the world can be ripples that we don't even see that happen. That I helped you with your sobriety and sobriety. I helped you with being sober, and you didn't even know that I also struggled with alcoholism myself. I was in my early 20s, and I spent almost every single day drunk without people knowing. I always had a water bottle that I always told everyone that I just was trying to stay hydrated when I was in classes. That was not true. After my mom passed away my senior year of college, I struggled pretty greatly with alcoholism. And it was a really turmoil time is probably one way to say it. I really didn't know where I was going in my life. My mom was kind of like my compass, and I felt like someone had taken that compass and put it on the table and said, hey, you need this? And I said, yes. And then they smashed it right in front of me. So I kind of lost a lot of my direction. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I spent years of my life kind of bumbling from one thing and fumbling from another. And it wasn't until I found community, and it wasn't until I found friends that were brave enough and loyal enough to me to tell me that I had a problem. And that's when my life kind of started changing. I think we all look at, being sober in different ways. I feel like there's a lot of people who have this idea that if you take a sip or you just, one night do something, you then are no longer sober, that you got to start from scratch. And I think that there is such a hard-lined version of what sobriety is. Like, I think that is like generally almost a toxic way to approach it, in my opinion. I think there's nothing wrong with that if that's what's working for you. For me, I've had like 4 sips and 4 drinks over the last 3,000 days. I will never say that discounts my progress and where I've been as a person. I think that it is genuinely difficult to look at the existence that we're living through, especially as a trans person in America right now. I think that it is okay sometimes to fall back on something that you don't want to. I think falling back into it in a way that can really ruin your life, that's a whole different ball game. So I've made rules for myself. If I ever drink, I never drink alone. If I ever drink, I only drink half a glass at the most. And if I ever drink, I make sure that I do it with someone that I truly, truly trust and I love and care about greatly. Otherwise, I don't touch it. And it's only been 4 times in 3,000 days. I do not think that makes those 2,996 days any less valuable to me. So that's what we're talking about today. We are talking about sobering realities. We're talking about things that we don't want to admit that are true, and we don't want to admit that maybe there may not be a better way for us to go about it. Life can be unpredicting. Life can be rough. Life can sometimes throw a wrench at you when you're expecting a piece of paper, but it can still hurt, and paper can still cut. So regardless of what is being thrown at us, it is always good to know that we're not alone, regardless of how sobering that reality is or not. So without further ado, let's get to the very first handy question of the day. Here we go.
Hi, Mercury. My name is Jamie. My pronouns are she, her, and I am messaging you from Michigan. We have a basement room that's probably 5 foot by 5 foot that we had mitigated for mold before we purchased the house. So it has been stripped down to the studs and just the moisture barrier. But I'm completely overwhelmed with do I have to take down all of the studs or what to do? The ceiling is also just corrugated metal in here. I just feel so overwhelmed and I don't want to screw it up because I don't want to get mold. So yeah, I hope that you're able to help us out here. Thank you so much for what you do. Love you. Bye.
Well, Jamie, I think that the key word for your message here is going to be exasperated. I think that I can just tell by the sound of your voice, especially when you're calling a stranger on the internet. I can tell that you kind of don't know where to turn, and there's a lot of different things to think about. The first thing I'm going to say, because the theme of the show is sobering realities, is the very first red flag, the very first thing that we have to look at is the fact that it had already needed mold mitigation before you moved in. And you said 5 by 5. That's a very small room. And the smaller the room can sometimes be harder to ventilate it. So there isn't a lot of airflow going in there. The moisture barrier actually might be working against you in that room. It all depends on how it's set up. So we're going to be talking about what can we do and how this is supposed to work to get a better understanding of what the problem actually is. And then we will go forward with all this. Okay, Jamie? The first thing that we need to talk about is how is a basement supposed to be able to breathe? All of the things in your house have to breathe and move. There's this idea that so many people have is that a house is rigid, that a house is put into the ground and it stays there for the rest of time. That just isn't true. A house expands and it shrinks depending on if it's made of wood, concrete, whatnot. Soil itself moves. And if your house is built on soil, which I guess almost all houses are, if your house is built on soil, then it's going to move with a very, just the very, very nature of the beast. That's going to be how it happens, okay? You also have to take into account that you don't want a house to completely repel all of the moisture in the ground itself, right? You want a house to be able to breathe, because that breathing through the concrete in your basement is what kind of helps the whole house itself to stay, to prevent moisture problems from, preventing there being mold and et cetera. If it didn't have any of it, right? If you had the house wrap and it was able to completely repel every single thing, you would have problem with the moisture in your house escaping. It wouldn't have anywhere to escape, which means it would just develop mold in that way, right? So there has to be a little bit of a breathing going in and out. You just don't want too much of either to make a larger problem, okay? So what most houses have since 1960s is something called a house wrap. A house wrap is not a really wonderful, creative, rhyming song. A house wrap. I would go into a rap right now if I trusted my skills. I do not. I I do not trust me to be able to go off that tangent. But back to what a house wrap actually is. It's basically like a plastic blanket you wrap around your house, even around like the base of your house, like where the foundation is below the ground. That is something that you can add in after the house is built. You could do that. It is a huge task and it causes a lot of problems in order to do that. Okay. So if your house was built before 1960 and you don't have the ability to rent out an excavator and hire a team to like wrap your house and to be able to start that way and kind of try to prevent the problem that is happening in an old basement like that, then it's going to be something that you can't really solve in that way because it's a very pricey one. But the way that a house wrap is supposed to work is essentially it lets some in and it lets some out, but it doesn't necessarily let all of it in. You know what I mean? Like it kind of prevents it from soaking into the concrete and then causing a high percentage of moisture in the air in your basement, which can cause problems throughout the entire house. Now, when we are also talking about this, it's really important to keep in mind that we are always including grading. So grading refers to the slope that's moving away from your house or into your house, okay? If you have an inward grade, so if that grade is coming towards your home, you're basically having hills that are surrounding your house. Those tiny little hills, little bumps in the ground, little mounts. And if water, when it rains, is pooling around the base of your house, well, then you're going to have a lot more issues because all of that water is going to be concentrated in that area and it's going to soak through the ground. And when the ground is so soaked up with water and moisture, it's going to have to go somewhere else. And the most likely spot, if it's all the area around that water is already soaked and it cannot drink any more water, the thing it's going to have to go through is your house. And that's where you get some massive problems in your basement, because if your grading isn't done in a way where it's moving away from the house, then you can have long-term problems. You can also have this create cracks in your walls. It can cause a bunch of various different problems in your home. So it's good to kind of keep that in mind when we are talking about all of this, that grading is one of the bigger things that we can do. Now, how do you solve that problem? A lot of times it's getting fresh soil and kind of making it all more like an off-ramp, like you're trying to get off a highway and start trying to get on a highway. And if you do it a gradual enough, I think the rule is like for every 6 feet, you need 1 inch of like decline. Hello, this is the future Mercury who is editing this podcast right now. And I will tell you that Mercury is very wrong here. It's 1 inch for every foot you move away from the house for the first 6 feet. That is what the code is. It might be different variation here and there, but that is our overall code. I hope that helps. Jeez, Mercury, you should fact check yourself before you open your mouth. Believe is what the code is supposed to be. I think it's similar for gutters. Actually, that might be for gutters as well. Oh, hi, it's Mercury from the future again. No, it's got a 1/4 inch for every 10 feet, Mercury. Look it up! So gutters is another way to be able to prevent these problems, because if you're having so much water that it's overflowing in your gutters, then it's going to like concentrate in that same area. Then it's dropping right into that zone, and it can also cause you problems. So if you're having problems with your gutters can't like drink enough water fast enough, if you're just getting too much of a high concentrated of rain at one time, then you should upgrade from that like standard 4-inch or 5-inch gutter and move to like a 6-inch gutter. I did that right away when we moved in, and I also upgraded to a much larger downspout to make sure that it can push all the water through. We also have a lot of leaves and a lot of like debris we have to take care of. We get little helicopters stuck in our gutters constantly because we're right underneath a tree that refuses to die. That tree definitely, I love the tree. I think it's just a beautiful, amazing tree. Our neighbors, every single time that they see me, I mean every day my neighbor Jim will come outside and be like, when are you cutting that tree down? And I'm like, Jim, I'm sorry, buddy, but you know what? You're going before that tree is, bud. But the tree does cause a lot of problems. To the point where I've actually offered to help Jim and clean out his gutters for him so he will stop giving me crap about the tree. But that being said, if the gutter isn't doing a significant, like a good enough job, essentially, of getting the water out, well, then that's going to cause a problem too. And if the downspout is like, essentially, if you're not hitting one of those like block and slabs of plastic or concrete or brick that the water hits into from the downspout, and it's just kind of like going into the ground, well, you're just essentially taking a hose and shooting it at your foundation, and that could be causing problems too. So anything that you can do with an extension, like a downspout extension, anything that can get the water away, all that stuff can help. Now, those are the three big ones. So you got the house wrap, you have the grading away from your house, and you have your gutters. Those three working in tandem can help a lot, right? A lot of people also believe in putting like bushes around a house. A lot of people believe in basically making abstractions that can help from, bringing the water in, right? Now, some experts are going to tell you that, having bushes and those things by your house is actually bad. Some say it's good. The debate is just always constantly raging when it comes to how grading is supposed to be and what is the most effective. So don't take my word for it. Do some research on that and see what it is like in your neck of the woods, right? Because here in tropical Madison, Wisconsin, boy, that joke is really starting to change with the global climate change. The reality is the last couple of years, we've had some major rainfalls here in Madison, Wisconsin. In 2018, we had what they called a 100-year flood that felt like we had 3 of those in about 10 days, to the point where I was famously called in to help because I was part of the emergency team here in Madison for a little bit, and I had to direct traffic and help people with the flooding in various areas. And I was also sent out on behalf of FEMA to help people in Black Earth, which is right outside of Madison too. And the massive amount of flooding in areas that were not flood zones was pretty significant and pretty scary. So planning ahead and kind of knowing these things and what it is like in your neck of the woods is really important. Like if I'm telling you this and you specifically recall there being a time where there was a lot of water around your house and you could like almost have a little frog swim in it. You know what I mean? Like if you open your door and you just see like, a turtle just having the best day ever, then might have an issue. Then everything I'm about to tell you may not matter. Okay. And it's important to keep this in mind that what I'm about to tell you is really linked to everything else I've already said, but also it really depends on the environment in which you're living in. Okay. If you're living in the Midwest, then you already know how much moisture is in the air a lot of the times. Your basement itself should be riding around, 30 to 50%. I really like seeing it somewhere between 35 and 45. I think that's a really comfy spot. I think when it gets too dry, there's problems. You're going to have a lot of static electricity in your house. If you love petting your cats, and and every time that you pet them in the winter, you scare the living crap out of them because there's so much static in the air, it can be partially because there's too dry in your home. And that can be a problem, okay? So try to make sure that you kind of ride between that 35, 45 is a pretty comfortable place to be. Now, anything above 50%, though, starts getting into this place of that's enough moisture to create mold and to have mildew and to have that damp smell in the house. Like it's like your home is constantly wet. You know what I mean? Anything above 50% is essentially like, you're living in Seattle. If you've never been to Seattle, boy, oh boy, that joke is funny. I'm sorry you don't get it. But there's always this sense of like moisture in the air when you're in Seattle. Like, every single day When we were on book tour last year, I had an umbrella with me, and my wonderful COO was with me, Basil, and Basil lived there in Seattle for a hot minute, and then said I was going to look stupid for having an umbrella. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm bringing an umbrella. And I did get a lot of looks, but it literally rains nearly every day, and there's always a sense of moisture in the air. If your basement's above 50%, it can be like that, especially when you get into the danger zones of like 65, 70% moisture in the air. Then it becomes a place of like, you might not be able to put a furnished basement. Like you might not be able to have a room down there like that, you know? It can be a real big issue, and you might have to do excavation if you really want something down there. You might have to really think about grading or really think about gutters. Those things have to come first, essentially. If those keep happening, it's not going to matter. And if you already know what caused the problem last time, like if this is not an exterior problem, if the reason why that mold happened is because of broke pipe that has gotten fixed, or, you know, something that was spilt and just stayed in the air and wasn't actually soaked up or something. If something like that happened, and that's why there was mold and mildew in that room that was 5x5, then you got a way big, you know, it's a different kind of story. Then you already know essentially that, that's a freak thing that happened. Yeah, we could have easily have prevented it if we had something else happen, et cetera, if we were ready for that to happen. And in this instance, it won't happen again. But if it happened because of exterior forces, and you have something above 70% moisture in the air, then, you know, I don't want to say it's a lost cause, but everything that you do will be A, way more expensive, B, might not work. You might do all this work and not have it actually work the way you want to. And B, you can get away with it if you really put in a lot of ventilation. And I really think experts who do this for a living might say, yeah, I know you can basically make anything work if you properly take care of grading, properly take care of the house wrap, and properly take care of the gutters, and then put proper ventilation in the basement. But I'm going to tell you, as someone who's like, you know, always riding on a budget, I hear that and I'm like, I don't know. That's a big overhaul for a room that's 5x5. You know, that's a small room that has a big problem, you know. But if you do all those things and you kind of know where you're at, and this was a freak thing, and it's riding around 70% moisture or a little less, somewhere between 50 and 70, maybe even 75 to be honest. You can probably fix the problem with having a constant dehumidifier running in your basement. If you're in the Midwest, you should just have a dehumidifier in your basement all the time anyways. So once you can set it to be at a specific percentage, like mine's at 35 right now, the house. So my basement, for the most part, is really controlled environmentally by that dehumidifier. And when it goes a little bit above that 35%, well, then it's going to start working. I actually think I have it set to 35, but it only turns on when it hits 40 or something like that. And you can set them to be various different, settings and modes and et cetera. I have it set up where my hose is running directly to my floor drain in my laundry room, which is in my basement. And I just have it zip tied to that drain cover. And that way, it never really has a problem. It's not going to slide around. It's not going to accidentally flood my basement like a friend of mine did a couple years ago. You get all the moisture out, but now it's just like cycling back through. The moisture is literally going through the dehumidifier and then out the hose into just the entire basement and then being soaked up again by the dehumidifier. So making sure that you can have that water leave the basement is really important through that floor drain. So that's that. The dehumidifier, especially if it's in a basement, and if you get one that is somewhere around $150, $200, is usually where they start getting really reliable and good. I always say that when it comes to a dehumidifier, a space heater, or a humidifier, you don't play around because you get what you pay for, and you want to make sure that you are being mindful of the the fact that all of this equipment can cause fires, and it's really mindful, like, hey, you should have something nearby in case something goes wrong, right? Having a fire extinguisher, having a quick can of various different things, having one of those fire blankets, anything around those lines, just nearby. We just got an extra fire extinguisher for our basement that I think is a really handy thing to have around. And we also have 3 fire blankets, one in the garage, one in our kitchen, and then one in the basement right now. And to be honest, we probably want to get another one for the bedroom just in case too. If you don't know what a fire blanket is, boy, do I highly recommend getting it. Various different kinds of fire require various different kinds of way of being put out, and fire blankets are often one of the most effective and fastest ways to choke out a fire before it even starts. But all that being said, I'm getting off topic, but it's Mercury Stardust on the Handyman Hotline. If I wasn't off topic with 30 minutes in, then it's not the show. All that being said, though, so you took care of the problem, with a dehumidifier, and you took care of the problem with like knowing the grade and with the gutters and with the house wrap. And then what else do you got to do? The ventilation is really what's next. If your house has proper ventilation as it is, like basically the way it's supposed to work is that you have like these vents in your house. Often you'll have like vents in your attic, and the air will come in one way, kind of cycle through the house, go through the entire house, including the basement, and then go up to another side of the house, and then go through air venting that's in your attic and on your roof. Like, that is what it's supposed to kind of do. You're supposed to have airflow. You don't want your house to be airtight, right? What you want to do is make sure that it's airtight in all the places that you can control. You don't want an airtight completely. You need to have airflow in there. That's when you have moisture that's stuck in the house. One of the biggest problems I think that people do, especially in winter, is that people love to stay warm, right? And we have these furnaces that can, get the house warm. Or, hey, we have let's say you have a bathroom that you love to take hot showers in, and now you have all that water that's like, on the top of the ceiling, that maybe it's dripping, like there's so much moisture in that room that is not getting out enough. That's poor ventilation. And in winter especially, it's very common to create mold problems that then carry into your summer and then carry into long-term issues. If your house doesn't breathe, if you're completely airtight, there's nowhere for that moisture to go. Then the moisture is stuck, and it still exists, and it's not absorbing anywhere, and then it's going to just cause more and more problems. And then it's going to create all this mold and mildew in the air, and you often smell it before you see it. So if you're ever in a room and you're like, that doesn't smell right, chances are it's already happening. You just don't see it yet. Okay? Now, how do you fix that in a basement? Basically, you can add a vent ducts in your basement. There's various different ways to do it depending on how your HVAC system, your airflow system works in your house. It's all going to be dependent on that, but that's a good place to start to see if there is any air vents in your basement. In an instance for me, we had ventilation pretty much laid out in our basement. What had to have happened is about, in 2018, like I said, I think that there was a major flood, and I think that we have a little bit of poor grading around the house, and I also think that there was cracks that were forming in the house. There were vertical cracks where a lot of the moisture, again, if the water can't go through the ground, if it's too soaked up for any more water to go through the soil, then it's going to have to go through the concrete. And what's going to give first? Completely soaked soil or concrete? Concrete's going to give first. And that's where you have problems, where you can have almost like a hose turned on in your basement through the wall sometimes, I don't know if you've ever seen videos of when folks are having massive floods, and all of a sudden it's just like water will find the smallest crack and then exploit that. And that's essentially what can happen. So that's what I think happened in our basement. It was furnished. It was furnished, but then something happened and it had to be torn up, and there was mold and stuff in the house. So I know we had that issue. Now it's about mitigating it and trying to make sure we can cut it off at the start. So if you do that, if you do all that, if you make sure, if you understand about the house wraps are basically code after 1970, but they were starting to get really common around 1960 or so. And that all is dependent on where you live. Don't take my word for it. Always make sure you reference and you fact check me and cross check. Never take me as 100%, because depending on where you live, what county you live in, what city you live in, all that can be subject to change. And I want to make sure that you get the right information. So just kind of point you in that direction. So house wrap, grading, gutters, dehumidifier, and venting. Now, I'm not done yet. Now we get into how do you make the room work to prevent further problems. You're going to want to get something called, so we're going to be talking about subflooring. Okay, for those who don't know, understand what subflooring is. Subflooring is essentially what goes on top of your bare floors or on your foundation, on your concrete in your basement, and then is right before your actual flooring. So this before your hardwood, your vinyls, your carpets, and the same thing is on like your first floor and your second floor. You get all the boards that are all laid out, and then you can put subflooring on top of that. Subflooring, in my opinion, should almost always be plywood. People are going to say OSB. OSB is really common, but I view OSB as like particle board, almost like trying to think of a good example for you, like IKEA furniture. Like I feel like it can break apart like IKEA furniture and can soak up moisture like IKEA furniture. And that's kind of how I view OSB. It's like it's a fine alternative. It's lighter, it's cheaper, and it's kind of taking the place of plywood in a lot of construction areas just because of it being harder and harder to get solid wood and to get more lumber. And lumber is really getting hard to get a hand of right now. We don't have enough lumber in this country at this point, and it's starting to be a real big issue. So OSB is really common. If you're able to, plywood is where I would go for subfloor. So now you understand what a subfloor is in a very basic way. What do you want to do to prevent it? Like, you need to have floor. You need to have that floor breathe. You need to have your wall breathe a little bit. So I would do something that has like a dimpled membrane. So a dimpled membrane is basically a piece of plastic. There's a lot of brands out there that do this, but they have like just little ridges and ripples on this piece of plastic, essentially a rubber. I think they're various made of different kind of materials, but those ripples kind of like help separate it from the actual concrete itself, and that amount of separation can kind of help with the breathing and the airflow. And then if you put subflooring on top of that or foam on top of that, some people really like to put that like 3/4 inch foam on top of that, and then put the 3/4 inch plywood on top of that. But if you put all that on your floor, you'll lose 2 inches of your height in your basement. So not every person can do that, right? That 2 inches is a lot in a basement. But I do like to use that dimple membrane, and then using 3/4 inch plywood can really save you in this way. A lot of people are going to disagree. I think that there's a huge amount of people who really think that 1/2 inch OSB is a way to go. Because it's cheaper, and if anything happens, you can just throw it out faster. I think that that's a crazy talk. I'm not a huge fan of that. Plywood has been proven to resist water more, where OSB has been proven to absorb it more. And even if it was just like 5% worse, I wouldn't do it because it's your basement. It's a subfloor. It's absolutely expensive, absolutely a nightmare to rip out and try to replace. So I would spend a little bit more money up front to make sure you never have to do this again. That would be what I would do, is make sure that I had a really decent subfloor, like a plywood. And then on top of that, I wouldn't put carpet down there. We have a basement. We're in a basement here at the studio that we do all this, to do the show out of. and do all the work down here. We have about a moisture around 65% in the basement. I have a dehumidifier that runs most days. Right now, it's not so much. And I used self-leveling cement, specifically kind that can kind of be a little bit more, resistant to moisture. And then on top of that, I do plan on using some membrane, and then using a really like thinner layers of plywood because I don't need a whole lot down here. And then I would go into using the carpet because we really want carpet down here. But carpet does run the risk of being more absorbent of that moisture and can keep moisture in it, and that can cause problems. If you really want to make sure you're not going to have any issues, Jamie, then I'm going to say you want to go vinyl. Vinyl would be the next best thing. And then for your walls, having that moisture barrier on your walls should work really well if you have proper ventilation in that room. If you don't have ventilation in that room specifically, you got to put it there. Put a vent, put some airflow vents and etc. in there to make sure it gets proper flow. And then that moisture barrier, that plastic that's around that room should be fine. It should be fine at that point. But if it isn't having that ventilation, then moisture barrier actually makes the problem because it's keeping all the humidity in your home inside of it, and instead of allowing it to be out, to breathe it out. So I think that's basically everything we went through. There is so much more, but I think I pointed you in the right direction. Basements are such humongous jobs. They're humongous jobs. They're so much fun to work on, but they can be such a headache. So at the end of the day, Jamie, it really does come down to, is this something that I can prevent before the problem starts again? Or is this a problem that I just don't have the financial capital or time or, community reach or understanding or knowing who to reach out to, right? That's where the problem becomes in this instance. So that's what's sobering about this. Sometimes the answer is you don't really have a good one until you can make sure that problem is not going to happen again. You shouldn't start again. Okay. In a 5x5 room, I hope this wasn't a bedroom and that this was a really needed space. If it was a really needed space, then do the best you can. But then I wouldn't spend a whole lot of money trying to make sure that it was, done in a way where it's going to be I'm going to spend the money and do the right way and do this and that. I would try to get stuff that's all going to be moisture resistant. And I would try to do it in a way where I'm not going for perfection. I'm going for easy replacement. And I would keep in mind that, okay, well, if this gets damaged or if I start seeing mold on it or mildew on it, then screw it. That stuff, it's like, it's essentially like it spreads real fast, essentially. And if mildew is on one thing, it will be on another thing. So you got to get rid of it before it starts infecting your other wood and your other things in your home and in that area too. So I think I kind of went through everything. Like I said, house wrap, your grading, your wonderful gutters. Then you got your dehumidifier. Then you got your venting in your basement. Then you got how you actually do the subflooring from the membrane to the plywood, and then to the vinyl, and then to the moisture barrier around it, and then having really good ventilation in that room. If you can do all those things, I know this is a lot, then you're going to be okay. And if you already knew most of those things and a lot of those things are already in place, you're going to be golden. But if any one of those things can't really fall in your direction and it's going to be a lot of upfront work, you might want to think about going in a different direction, Jamie. I hope that helps you. I send you all the love in the world. And I need a drink of water now because I talked for a very long time. And I would like to hear the second question of the day.
Hi, Mercury. I was wondering how I know if it's safe to drill near an outlet. I don't want to buy a voltage detector.
I heard this call yesterday, and the reason why I'm laughing is because Of course, the very first thing I'm going to say is you should get a voltage detector. And then before I can even think it, you're like, I'm not doing it. You're like, nope, Mercury. I'm not doing it. I don't want to deal with that. Hey, I can understand why you don't want to get a voltage detector. There are a lot to read. They can be really expensive to get a quality one. I don't recommend ones that are under $50. I see some voltage detectors that are just like, I don't know if I trust that with my life, you know? But when it comes to really good ones, you can get a Fluke, which is a great brand, or a Milwaukee above 120 bucks. I think if you're a homeowner, they're really great investments. Yeah, I think learning how to read a multimeter, learning how to read a voltage detector, learning how to read those things, really important. I'm not kidding when I say that. Like being able to just understand how those work and how to read ohms off of it, or how to read various different kinds of settings on it. That's really, really important. So I highly recommend looking into that if you haven't already. Then the next thing that comes to mind is a wand, a little voltage wand. Every single brand at this point makes them. I think that the one that I use the most is Fluke. The most comfortable with it. I think Idea has one. I think that Milwaukee has their own little wand. I don't necessarily like them. I wouldn't trust them with my life if I had to depend on it 100%. But if I like to use it in addition of using other things. Like I like to always make sure I turn off the breaker, and then I check the wand to make sure that I check that it's no longer on. So doing those things, better safe than sorry, right? You don't need a voltage checker, or a multimeter at that point. If you got a wand, you can at least check your work in that way. Now, another way that you can go about this, if you want to know if that outlet has power, is you can just plug, a radio into it. What year is it? Why did I say radio? A light will be better. I'm going to tell you right now. I think Eleanor is. There's no way you own a radio, Eleanor. What is it? 1995? Jesus Christ. But oh my God. Sometimes I feel like I say things and I'm like, yeah, boy, my time has gone and went. I feel like it's gone with the wind, and I'm just Scarlet there, just like, no. Oh God, I'm wearing a beautiful red outfit right now. I feel like I should be Scarlett O'Hara, minus the whole fact that she's a white supremacist. Anyways, so moving on. Moving on. If we are looking at making sure that we want that outlet not to have power, so turn off the power, right? And then you can check it by putting a lamp into that and make sure that it's off, or by using an outlet tester. I think having an outlet tester, you can get them for $4 or $5. They're great. They have little indicators on them a lot of the times too, and they will tell you when something is wrong. Like, oh, this has no ground. Oh, this has a bad neutral. You know what I mean? It'll tell you those various things, and that's handy. If you are like Mercury, I don't even know what breaker that is. Flip them all, turn all the breakers off. Better safe than sorry, to be honest. But if you're trying to locate that outlet, there's something called a electric outlet screamer. Screamers are getting more common. There's more than just one brand now, but screamers are this. A lot of times they're for light bulbs now. Like you can screw into a lamp or screw it into a light fixture in your ceiling, and it will scream bloody murder like it's the most awful noise you've ever heard. But when you're turning off your breaker and you flip it, you can hear it, so you don't need anyone else with you. It's super handy. I really like them. They also have adapters that will let you plug into an outlet now too. So there's various different things that you can do here that can help you with that. So all that being said, let's talk about how the wire is supposed to be laid in your house after the 1950s and onwards. Okay, so the way that it works is an outlet is required to be a certain height away from the floor. Okay, that it's universal in most areas. I think this code is specifically national, I believe, but I do not want to say the number because it's been a hot minute. But it's somewhere it it's in the inches. It's like maybe like 19, 20, 22 inches. Someone's going to yell at me. And that person is me. So it's 16 inches to the bottom of the receptacle. That is the standard. The NEC, or the National Electrical Code, doesn't say that it's a mandate, like it's not a code, but it is the standard to be between 12 to 16 inches, 16 inches being the most common. So don't trust me. Look it up. But the outlet has to be at a certain height. It's not where the floor 2x4 and the actual stud meet. So you're not going to be in a location in that wall, hopefully, unless it's done very wrong, where it's going to be, wires are going to be going horizontally into it and going vertically into it, all at once, in a way that might really be hard to make sure you hit and not miss. Okay. In this instance, you're if you do this in a way where you're using a stud finder and you're taking your time, you're actually a lot of times almost safer, because you know where the wiring is. You know it's going up the side of that 2x4, that stud in the wall. Like, you know that wire is going vertically up the wall at that point, or it's going through an eye hole through the 2x4 that the stud is. But even that's not going to cause you a problem unless you use too long of screw. Okay? So these are the tips I'm going to tell you real quick, Eleanor, and they're pretty straightforward. You want to get yourself a really good stud finder. I like the Stud Pop. It's $10. If you don't already have a Stud Pop, get it. I think everyone should have them, in addition to having an actual horizontal stud finders. Franklin makes probably one of the best ones. It is like a horizontal indicator that has all these different lights on it that will tell you where the middle of a stud is. You want to know where the middle of the stud is because you want to make sure you're not just going off to the side and hitting a wire in accident. Even if you're not by an outlet, you should have that mentality. You know what I mean? You should always try to make sure you use caution in that way. So I would very, very much make sure that you can hit it right in the middle of the stud, okay? The Stud Pop, in addition, will kind of will ensure that you are in the right spot. Here's the thing. The outlet is going to be attached to the side of a stud, and it should always be attached to the side of a stud. Surprise! Feature Mercury yet again in this episode. So I looked this up because I wasn't actually positive once I heard myself say it. But I was always taught you had to make sure that the electrical box was on the stud. I think this is for stability. I think this is just for safety. And then that makes sense. But technically, it is not code either. It is a good practice to try to do that. But there are some circumstances where you can't make that happen. But when you do that, you must use an old work box. An old work box is a specific kind of electrical box that goes into drywall and is designed to do this and still be stable and to be safe. So I would think about that when you're listening to me talk about something that I think I know, but I don't. If it's not, I saw a video that someone sent me recently where this this outlet was very much not in a good place. It was way below where it should be, and it had no box it was in. It was not in an electrical box. It was not in a quad box or anything. It was just in the wall. And people, they just used like pieces of wood to hold it into the wall, which is, it made me, I had like heart palpitations when I saw it. I'm like, that is not code. But in this instance, you are having that stud that's going vertical, and you want to make sure that you go right into the middle. Then you want to make sure that whatever screw you're using, Eleanor, it's like 1.25 inches. Okay, so essentially this is how thick your wall should be. So you are having, about an inch, about a 1/2 inch thick of drywall, and then you have about like 1 inch or so before you even get to where the wires could even be going through the actual stud itself. But the chances are that's not even a problem in this instance. But just to make sure, if you go through the middle of a stud, you're not going to have that issue. Okay? You're going to be A-okay if you use a short screw no matter what, right? So if you think of it like, oh, an 1.25 inches is going to be enough to get through that drywall, enough to get through enough in that that piece of wood that's behind the wall, and then through a bracket, right? So you have a lot of things to go through. But if you use like a 3-inch screw, you are increasing the chances of getting something on accident, you know? So I would say in this instance, size does matter. And I would go smaller, to be honest. I would go with 1.25 inches to make sure. 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. I won't go bigger than that, especially if you're not sure. And if you're next to an outlet, you're going to be okay. But I'm going to tell you something that this is why you're in the themed show of Sobering Realities. If you're doing something like this, Eleanor, all the things I told you to do probably are more money than a multimeter could be, okay? A multimeter, though, is not going to show you necessarily where things are in the wall, right? But it is going to tell you on the voltage that's going to that outlet and all those things. But I think in this instance, this is what I would do. I would turn off that breaker, make sure there's no power going through. So if something did happen, that I wasn't going to accidentally cause a problem. If you really want to go the extra mile, you would turn off the gas and turn off the water in your house. If this is a rental, you're not going to be able to do that. But those are things I would do if you really wanted to go the extra mile. You don't really need to worry about that, though, Eleanor. And then I would use 1.25 inch screw, and then I would go through into that drywall, but I would make sure that I'm hitting the stud. But the stud is going to be on either side of that. The outlet's going to be on either side of the stud. It might be on the left or the right. I forgot what is standard. But it's either on the left or right of that stud. You just got to find it by using one of the methods of stud finding that I told you, and then you're good to go. So, hey, I fixed it. I hope that I gave you enough confidence, Eleanor. But the sad reality is, you might have to spend a little bit more money just to make sure if you really want to. And, sometimes you can't, avoid those kind of things when you want to do these kind of projects. So be careful. If all the things I told you don't make you feel confident enough to do it, don't do it. And if you feel like you can do it and you feel real confident, do a pilot hole first. Like go with a really small drill, like a really small drill bit, like a very small one that will feel it, like feel something push instead of going right through it. A bigger one will just tear up and cause massive problems before you can solve anything. So do a small pilot hole to begin with and then do the screw just to make sure. And if you do that, you should be good to go. Okay, Eleanor? I hope that you were doing good. It is no surprise that this show is a pirate ship. We keep everything afloating on those rocky seas with your help. I have a book called Safe and Sound, A Renter's Friendly Guide to Home Repair. It's a #1 New York Times Bestselling book, and it has 78 how-tos that are very clear in the book, with QR codes and emotional resets at every single end of chapter. And my style of teaching is littered through the entire book itself. I highly recommend, if you want to get it from a store and not my website, please do it from bookshop.org. Support local bookstores if you can, but it is on Amazon, it is on Barnes & Noble, and it is everywhere you buy books. If you want to buy from my website and get an autograph, you can. That is a wonderful way to support this little business. We are finally making headway with this business because of the autograph books, so thank you to everyone who buys them. We also have other merch on the website. We have posters and stickers and so many various things that are always coming and going, from t-shirts to hats and much more to come. But if you're not someone who wants any material objects, but you want something in return still, my knowledge can be purchased by calling PopCall. PopCall is a service where you can call me and you are paying per minute to talk to me about whatever situation you are going through. You can leave a 15-second message, in a video form, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. No call has been over 20 minutes, and every single minute is $2 per minute. We also have Substack and Patreon. This show that you're watching currently, the Handyman Hotline, is released 1 week early every single week on the Substack and Patreon. So if you want these episodes a little bit earlier than other folks, you can get them right now by going to my Substack and my Patreon. Thank you for supporting us. Now back to the show.
Mercury, I really, really need your help. I hope you understand. I don't necessarily want to do my name. Pronouns are they, them. My problem is I have cockroaches. Just went through a bad relationship situation. They were not helping me clean. I am trying to get my house into shape. I live in Southern California and there are a ton of cockroaches. I am trying to do my best, but I could really use your help, please. I saw your video on the ants. Help.
Okay, first and foremost, I love you. You're doing okay. I can tell you're beating yourself up, like you're blaming yourself for this. Just telling you right now. Sometimes we can create a problem like this, and cockroaches will come. But I also tell you, a lot of times cockroaches are already there. They're just waiting for it to get worse. You know what I mean? So don't beat yourself up too much. Also understand that it's not always a mess. You could have a really, really clean house and have cockroaches because moisture. It kind of goes into the first question that we had today when we were talking about that, not having proper ventilation in your house. If you don't have proper ventilation in your house, chances are you got cockroaches. They love that. They're just like, oh my God, look at this. A jacuzzi? Guys, you won't believe this. There's hot springs in this house. And they love that. They love that. Leaving out food and various things like that can also cause problems. I believe they're really attracted to sugar and things like that too. So be mindful of those things. Like don't keep out any food. If you're done eating, be done eating. If you got a lot of heat in the air and high moisture in the air, you got to find a way to get out of that. You know what I mean? Those are the quick and fast ways to address the issue. Now we're talking about the harder ones. Okay. If you're living in a unit home, like if you're living in like an apartment building that has like 8 units, I have a really bad thing to tell you. And that is nothing you are going to do individually is going to solve the problem because they're going to live in the walls. And I know a lot of people are going to find this gross, and I'm sorry that I'm telling you the gross thing. But it is kind of the reality is I worked at a property management company for a hot minute before I came here, right? So many of you know that. One of the things you may not know, though, is that we had 11 buildings. And about 8 of them had a significant amount of problems with cockroaches. We would have someone come in and spray for cockroaches every 2 weeks, which sounds like you probably should address that problem, right? Trying to get landlords to address that problem was a living gosh darn nightmare. But the reality is you need to get every single person in that apartment building to kind of follow the rules. And to make sure that all the food is taken away, that if they have to spray the cabinets, and they have to spray, anywhere you're storing food, they got to spray all of that, and you got to remove all of that before they can spray. So if you don't remove all that, if one person does that, then you're going to have an issue, right? If you're blocking the ventilation in your home and you're causing more humidity to stay in the air, that would also cause problems. So there's little things like that you can kind of get to. If you're living in an apartment building and you're having those issues, you all got to kind of be on the same page and kind of address the issue together. And that can sometimes be kind of hard to get everyone on the same page. Now, if you're living in a house by yourself and you're in Southern California, chances are you probably do have some issues and some environment things that may be attracting a lot of the cockroaches as well. Something that you can be mindful of is how do you kill cockroaches? Never been my favorite things to talk about killing any living creature on earth, but when it comes to cockroaches, you gotta kind of get the to get the outer shell, essentially. Boy, I should know what this term is. Not exterior. Hey guys, guess who this is? It's exoskeleton. But whatever the term of the outer part of cockroach is flashing on the screen right now. Exoskeleton. Because future Mercury, who is editing this right now, it learned what that was and is extremely mad at me, current Mercury, that I did not know what that flippin' word was. But you got to get rid of that first, because that is such like, you know, the old joke of like that, you know, the last people on Earth are going to be living after a nuclear holocaust is, you know, cockroaches and Mick Jagger. I don't know what where that joke came from, but that's always lives in my head rent free. But that joke essentially comes from the idea that the cockroaches have such a harder exterior that you got to get rid of that first before you can actually kill them. So there's like this powder that you can get. And the powder, when with the traps, can kind of do that job sometimes. But to me, that's the equivalent of, you know, essentially having a problem with, you know, someone throwing tennis balls at you, and, you know, instead of like finding a way to make sure they never throw tennis balls at you again, you're catching a tennis ball. Like, that's great. You got one ball, but now you have 500 coming at you still. So yes, that can totally do the thing. That can sometimes, when you do things like that and you kill them off and stuff, it actually, you know, will keep them at bay. But it doesn't mean it eliminates your problem. That you need to get an exterminator at that point, and you need to consult with a professional to really relieve the problem. There's a lot of other home remedies that people suggest, but I'm not going to share them. Just by the very fact that I am not a true believer of a lot of those home remedies, or a lot of home remedies when it comes to, you know, anything with, you know, with pests and you know, bugs or anything around those lines. I think a lot of them are rooted in, you know, half-truths, and I don't want to give you wrong information. But I'm going to point you in the direction of consulting with at least a professional, and go from there. Maybe a professional can kind of point you in the right direction too, and learn a little more. I hope that helps. I hope that is, you know, the best advice I can kind of give you. And the reason why this one's on the episode about sobering realities is because of how hard this one is to get rid of. The reality is nothing that I'm going to tell you is probably going to be enough. But I do want to say this. I want to say this, that I know you're beating yourself up and you feel like, when people talk about cockroaches, I know they can just make you feel like you're perma-dirty. Like, no matter what you do, you're always dirty. And you feel gross, and you find them in your clothes, or you find them here and there, and that just grosses you out. I want to tell you to hang in there. Do the best you can to make sure there's no clothes on the floor. Do the best you can to clean your sheets on a very regular basis, daily if you're able to. And really, if you're neurodivergent and you're ADHD, or if you have anything that kind of like restricts you from like learning how to, you know, keep a tidy home and do those things, I'm gonna recommend you a very good book by a very good friend of mine, by the name of Casey Davis. She wrote a book called Struggle Care. I highly recommend reading Struggle Care. She meets you where you're at. And she has some amazing tips there for people who are neurodivergent in various different ways, and meets you where you're at and kind of helps you address those larger issues that you may be having. Because here's the reality is, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just trying to live your life. And people are going to tell you, how dare you this, how dare you that. But the reality is, there's a lot of people that are this way. And you can beat yourself up all every single day if you want to, but that's not going to solve the problem. You know what I mean? So we just got to address it where it's at, instead of trying to force you into, you know, a little ball that you're not meant to be in, you know? And that's okay. We all function. We all operate differently. And I'm really proud of you for reaching out and seeing what you can do, you know? That's a really huge first step. And I'm proud of you for doing that. And I'm sending you all my love. And I know people who are listening to this are also sending you love, because that's what we do here. We send love. All that being said, I want to say thank you to everyone who's ever helped me and directed me in the right path. in my life. I've been sober for 3,000 days now. Last night, my spouse and I talked about it, and they gave me the biggest hug in the world. And they've been in my life the entire time through this. I met them essentially like a month prior to becoming sober, and we fell in love during a time in my life where I didn't need alcohol to mask who I was. And once I was able to be sober, once I accepted my reality and where I was at, then I could find out who I actually was, and that was Mercury Stardust. Prior to that, it was very hard for me to come to those terms. I didn't want to admit who I actually was. I didn't want to admit that I was a woman. It was very hard for me to, do that. I really masked a lot of my personality with the idea that I was like very anti-feminist, and I was very much a misogynist because I had internalized transphobia and internalized misogyny, and I couldn't get past that wall that I was putting up for myself because I was masking a lot of it with alcohol. So hang in there. I hope that everyone is hanging in there, and I thank you so much, Tiffany, for sending that love to me earlier in the podcast. And if you are someone who is struggling with any type of addiction, I want you to know you're not alone. And the best time to start fixing the problem was yesterday, but the second best time to start is right now. And I love you, and hang in there. And I believe in you, and I believe in your humanity. And I want you to take a breath, forgive yourself, and try to move on. And try to fix the things that you can control ahead of you instead of the ones you can't control behind you. Okay? And remember, as always, you're worth the time it takes to learn a new skill. Happy fixing, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Handy Ma'am Hotline. Mercury Stardust is the Handy Ma'am, and this episode was produced by me, Basil. Our theme song is written and performed by Rhodey Walker. You can find all of our back catalog of the Handy Ma'am Hotline on our Substack, where I'm also writing weekly update posts. So come check it out. We'll see you next time.
That was great!